We've been on an epic journey together. We've discovered that God is love, that He came to us as this guy called Jesus, and who's focused on a cosmic-wide rescue plan. And it's our story of His story, and it's recorded for us in this book called the Bible. And the thing about the Bible is understanding that, like this library, it's a collection of books. And it's a collection that tells the one continuous story of God. And it's complex and it's beautiful, and it is difficult to understand sometimes. And so in these next few moments, we'll unpick some of that complexity so that you can get to grips with it and understand it and fall in love with this story. One of the most amazing things about the Bible is that it's this one story told in a whole bunch of different ways. Like the Bible encompasses a whole range of different genres of literature, like styles of writing. And when you're reading a bit of the Bible, simply by recognising what kind of writing it is, we can begin to understand it that bit better. So what are the styles of writing that there are in the Bible? Well, the biggest chunk is something called narrative, or story. It's like the most epic of epics, like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. It tells a massive story. And we call it narrative because, unlike a fiction book, the narrative sections of the Bible are telling the real stories of real people interacting with their real God. So there's everything you would expect from an epic and complex story. There's ancient history, there's battles, there's dynasties, there's corrupt kings, there's man-eating fish, and there's the ordinary folk trying to live out life inspired by the God who loves them. So we also have in the Bible a whole bunch of poems and songs. And because a poem feels different to a story, we read it that bit differently. Because these poems are about the emotional rollercoaster of life, the ups and downs of trying to figure out life with God. And they're brilliant because we read them, and we know that we too can be emotional. We can ask the hard questions about following God, because we're not the first to face the lows of life and the joys of loving God. So you know what it's like when you get a campaign letter through your door, or you pick up a leaflet about a social issue that you care about, and it reminds you of the compassion that you once had, and it invites you to re-embrace caring for that thing. Well, the Bible is full of pamphlets and leaflets like that. We call them prophetic because they're books written in the Bible to call God's people back to their core, back to making a positive difference, back into a relationship with God. So they're powerful and they're moving and they're pretty challenging. And lots of them are historical about how God at certain points in time reminded His people to be who they said they were. Lots of us are looking for ways to improve our lives. We go to Pilates or read specific blogs in an attempt to improve ourselves, or you might say to become wiser. And it's something that God is super keen to encourage us to do as well. Not simply to read the latest blog on ethical living, but to have wisdom is to have a lifestyle like God's lifestyle. It's about doing things that anticipate the rescued future that we talked about in the previous videos. And so we've got a whole bunch of wisdom sayings, books of the Bible, that are like lifestyle guides to help us make good choices, God-shaped choices. As you'll have realised from what we've said before, Jesus is at the core of our faith as Christians, and it's the biographies of His life that are so super important to us. Like if we had to choose just one part of the Bible to keep, it would be one of the 4 Gospels, the 4 biographies of Jesus' life. Because in these 4 short and explosive books, you've got the story of the universe being turned on its head. They'll inspire you and challenge you and encourage you with their real life drama, their unbelievable miracles, and the utter love of a guy who we know as our friend and our God. So read these first and let them soak into every part of your being. Like any worldwide movement, Christianity has a foundation document, and we call it Acts. And it's the history of the very first Christians, what they did, who they were, and what they said. And it's how they processed this whole thing of Jesus as a life-transforming event. So it's great to read not just as a history, but actually as something that provides clues as to what a life following Jesus looks like. The last two types we want to show you are right at the end of the Bible. And the first are a whole bunch of letters. And they're here because in the early days of the church, a letter was how you got your message around. 2,000 years ago, there were tiny groups of Christians meeting all across the Mediterranean that had their lives transformed by God. And they're trying to figure out what life looks like now that Jesus is their focus. And so there are these letters written to these tiny communities of Christians, helping them to figure out things, sorting out problems. And so we read them as letters, working out how the situation talked about in the letter relates to our situation all these years later. And it gives us inspiration and principles to help us in our Christian communities. And the last genre is one of the most tricky and wonderful and amazing to read, and it's something called an apocalyptic. And 2,000 years ago, when these were written, there were quite a few books like this, full of rich imagery and weird scenes. And they're a little bit like a modern day comic book, because you know how Batman or Spider-Man are full of fantasy elements, stuff that would look seriously weird if it happened on your way to the shops. But at their core they talk about timeless themes like human identity and suffering and hope. And it's the same with these apocalyptic books of the Bible. Past the weird images, there is the timeless themes, the core, which is all about the promise of a hope, a promise of a fixed future, of a transformed reality, of harmony restored. And for us as Christians, the Bible is about including us in its 3,000-year-old history. It inspires us, it teaches us, it encourages us, and it explodes to include us. And the thing is that the story of the Bible doesn't end on the last page, because we continue that story as God's people, living out a better world here.